said to Titus, to the pure, all things are pure.
Welcome to Travels with John Stephenson.
Yeah. What does he mean?
Going through
to the pure,
Independence here, and
listen carefully, please.
headed down to,
it means that
of course, we went past Simon Kenton High School, Kenton Elementary, where I went to school.
So how come?
We're listening
because
to Michael
it is
Youssef
in its rightful place
on
in a
WIOK
heterosexual marriage.
107.5
Money
FM on the radio
is pure.
dial on our trip down to
To the pure-minded.
Dry Ridge Toyota Collision
How
Crafters.
come? Because we use money as our servant to serve God and to serve other people, not the other way around. And Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. How? You see, in the pursuit of godliness, the Word of God purifies our hearts, opens our eyes to see God. Listen carefully. To see God as He reveals Himself, not the way we want to
Our
perceive
great
Him,
library
not
here,
the way we want to create
where
Him in our
Tanya
own
works.
image, not the way we want to think of
Here in
Him. Verse
Nicholson,
16.
Kenton County Public
Paul
Library,
gives Titus
the William
a
R. Durr
spiritual
branch.
dichotomy.
Two great men,
They
R.C.
claim
Durr
to
and
know
William
God,
R. Durr.
just like James said. They say they have faith. They claim to know God, but by their
As
very
he
actions,
passed the Nicholson
by their
Christian
very
Church and
lives, they deny
Cadillac Drive, where I
They
used
are
to put in
detestable,
hay for Charlie
disobedient,
Dieters
unfit
years
for doing
ago.
anything
Great
good.
man. Now Tim
But
Guyman has his home built
Who's
back
Paul
there,
talking about?
built by his brother Ken
He's talking
Guyman
about anyone
and
who
Tim.
uses their claim to
And
Christianity
Sandy.
to deceive people. And that deception can be all
And I'm sure
very
Amy
subtle.
did some work in there
Satan
too.
is extremely subtle.
All the Guymans.
And I thought of how can I illustrate this to you, the subtlety of Satan and how he destroys and how he works. And I thought of a story that took place back in the days of the Soviet Union, when the power of the Soviet Union and in the factories, which they were all run by governments, owned by governments, they were suffering from a lot of petty thievery. The workers in the factories, they would steal little things here and little things there and hide them. And so what the government did, they put a guard in front of every factory, in front of every one of those places, right at the entrance, for one purpose. His task is to scrutinize the workers as they were leaving the workplace, to make sure they're not stealing anything from the factory. And so there was a sawmill outside of Leningrad. Now it's St. Petersburg. And there in that factory, there was a worker by the name of Petrovich. Petrovich was coming out of the factory one day with a wheelbarrow.
Oh boy.
And that wheelbarrow was filled with sawdust and wood chips and things like that, and useless stuff. And he was walking out. God said, "Stop it, Petrovich. What are you hiding there?" "Nothing. Only sawdust, wood chips, useless stuff." He said, "There is no way. You're not hiding something in there. Tip it over."
Richard
So he tips
Peebles
it
and the
over.
Hammonds live there on
And the
Green
guard
Road.
would kick it with his foot and trying to find something in a tool or something is stolen. There was nothing. He said, "Okay, pile it back, take it, go." The next day, at quitting time, Petrovich again coming out with a wheelbarrow filled with sawdust and wood chips. And he did this day after day. And the guard would tip it and look, and there was nothing there. The guard was absolutely convinced that this guy's hiding something, but he couldn't figure it out. He tried, he couldn't. Finally, he said to him, "I'll tell you what, Petrovich, level with me. Tell me what you're stealing and I won't turn you in." Petrovich said, "All right, wheelbarrows." Beloved, the devil has been doing the same thing in infiltrating the minds and the hearts and the lives and our homes and stopping us from pursuing godliness. He keeps us busy looking at some superfluous things here or there. He keeps us busy focusing on some worship style preference. He keeps us busy picking on each other, scrutinizing the wood chips and the sawdust, while he's smuggling wheelbarrows. We spend hours in front of television and the internet and few moments of reading the Word of God. We read all kinds of sordid stuff and sordid material while we speed read the Word of God. We can spend 3 or 4 hours in a bowl game, but if the church goes 5 minutes over time, we become antsy. We get more grief when our team loses than over the lost people are going to eternity in hell. What the devil is doing is stealing the wheelbarrows and leaving us focusing on the sawdust and the wood chips of life. Beloved,
Boy, so true.
in the pursuing of godliness, our actions speaks far louder than our words.
Boy, so true. Michael Youssef.
Pointed and convincing words from
Action
Dr.
speaks
Michael
louder
Youssef.
than our words.
This is Leading the Way.
As the eyes of the world focus on the latest flood of calamities, the most urgent may not be the most visible to the average person. For decades, we have seen an erosion of Christian values, but today we are experiencing a world gone mad. Christ followers are being edged out of cultural and political influence. Cultural norms are shifting. What can we do in a world hostile to Christianity? Dr. Youssef's book, Hope for This Present Crisis, presents a 7-part plan providing practical steps on how to be a godly influence in our society and how to take a stand for our faith in a culture aggressively opposed to the truth of Christ. You can read how to be a champion for truth and biblical principles. When you pre-order Hope for This Present Crisis, you'll also receive a free digital download, the Hope for This Present Crisis Action Guide. Contact us today to pre-order your copy of Hope for This Present Crisis for your gift of any amount. Visit us at ltw.org. Get a copy of this timely book today.
Dr. Youssef's brand new book, Hope for This Present Crisis, is available to order for a gift of any amount to Leading the Way. Give us a
Great
call.
to listen to all these
800-337-5323.
morning shows. Adrian Rogers.
Talk to a ministry representative and learn more. Or visit ltw.org.
David Jeremiah and Michael
Again,
Youssef.
That's 800-337-5323.
And Dr. Dobson. Of course, Gil Hammond.
To
One of my best friends.
ltw.org.
Him and Jan
Write
Hammond.
to us. We love getting your
Owners of
Write to
WIOK
Leading the Way,
107.5
Post Office Box
FM radio dial.
100, Atlanta, Georgia.
A lot of people don't realize that they've been
P.O. Box 20100,
running this Christian radio
Atlanta,
station
Georgia,
that they purchased,
30325.
which was used to be the old WNKR,
This
where I had
program
my
is
first
furnished by Leading the
radio
Way
show
with
called
Dr.
Education
Michael
Today.
Passionately
School tips
proclaiming
and the Dixie News.
uncompromising truth. Learn more
Education
at
Today,
ltw.org.
out of the old 7 Mile House there on Dixie Highway in Erlanger,
WIOK,
Kentucky,
Falmouth, Cincinnati, 107.5, Tri-State
which
Gospel.
at one time was the Right Way
570
Cafe,
Southern Kentucky Gospel, WIDS, Russell Springs,
but originally the
Jamestown.
7 Mile House.
And WIDS rebroadcasting on W240DB, Russell Springs,
That's
Kentucky,
John.
95.9 FM.
You're listening to Family Talk, the radio broadcasting division of the James Dobson Family Institute. I am that James Dobson, and I'm so pleased that you've joined us today.
As we go through Walton, Kentucky here, headed to Dry Ridge, Collision Crafters.
Welcome to Family Talk, the listener-supported broadcast division of the Dr. James Dobson Family Institute. I'm Roger Marsh with a trivia question for you. Do you remember the signature line from the 1960s TV show Lost in Space? Remember what it is? Danger, Will Robinson, danger. If you're old enough, that should have been a fun walk down memory lane. Well, our guest today here on Family Talk is Dr. Sharon May, president of the Safe Haven Relationship Counseling Center, and she has a warning for us about the effects of emotional danger in a marriage. She points out that when a spouse is living in constant fear that their marital partner will lash out with hurtful and demeaning words, that marriage is in trouble. If you feel like you're stuck in a difficult or disconnected marriage, that your guard is always up, or that you can't be vulnerable with
Thank
your
the
spouse,
good Lord, I
well,
have Miss
it's in the
June
right
Diamond
place.
Stevenson.
Dr. Sharon May received her
Praise the
PhD
Lord,
in marriage and
passing
family
ammunition of
therapy
godly
and a master's
principles.
degree in theology from Fuller Graduate School of Theology. She was raised in South Africa, and today she's based in Carlsbad, California, where she specializes in work with couples who are experiencing emotional disconnection. Dr. May also hosts marriage intensives. Her 2 books are entitled Safe Haven Marriage
Of course,
and
now,
How to
June
Argue
might have
so
a
Your
different
Spouse
attitude
Will
of
Listen.
this, because she
Let's
always
listen
signs
in
her
now as Dr. Tim
cards
Clemson
to me
continues with part 2
with how
of
much
his
she loves
conversation with
me.
Dr. Sharon May on
And then
difficult
little
and
tiny
disconnected
print she
marriages
puts down
right
at the
here
bottom.
on Family Talk.
Most of the time. can understand that.
Sharon, I couldn't wait for us to get to
I have to
this,
live with myself,
day 2
and it's
in
difficult.
talking about difficult and disconnected marriages. Sharon, I'm going to go back to a comment I made yesterday, and we unpacked this. Your intimacy in your relationship will never rise above the level of fear and or anger between the two of you. Sharon, there are patterns that sort of begin to unfold when we're getting sideways, when we feel emotionally distant, when we begin to maybe in the name of love try to get each other's attention, but all we're doing is wounding each other. And the real scary piece, Sharon, is those wounds can begin to go really deep, and they create
Maybe we can learn something by listening to this on the way down today.
Absolutely. And Tim, I'm so glad to be back for the second day, because I know so many couples, marriage is hard work. So many couples find themselves in seasons in a difficult marriage where we're just not getting along, that everything you say or do triggers me, and then the way I react triggers you, and you get irritated and I get frustrated, and I can't get you to see my view, and you seem so impossible that we then harden our hearts and we pull back, defending, blaming, and we emotionally disconnect. And we know living in a difficult, emotionally disconnected marriage is painful. It is lonely. It is so sad, but we don't have to.
Sharon, I want to reference the work of Dr. John Gottman. And I know you know Gottman's work very well. He's a real eminent marital research expert out of the University of Washington in Seattle. In some of Dr. Gottman's work, he talked about patterns of arguing, or I'll use the word carefully, fighting. It isn't that you're not going to argue or have differences or, quote, let's use the word fight. He said it's not really that. It's how you fight, how you deal with these issues. That's the difference. And that's an important distinction for us as we begin this journey on trying to navigate these kind of treacherous
Our great
waters.
friends over there.
Absolutely, not arguing.
Delightful Day
is not
Campers,
healthy for
Mike
the
Bryant and
marriage.
son and
If
family.
you're not arguing, I don't get to know your view, you don't get
From
to
the
know my
Boone
view.
County
We aren't
JCs.
intertwining our lives. So not arguing is not something you should aim for. All you're going to do is stuff, and then finally explode. It is how you argue. It is how you say, ouch, that hurts me. Or how you complain, hey, I don't like that. Or how you clarify. You know, you said this that made me feel insignificant or controlled or not worthy. Can you help me understand what you meant by that? And John Gottman says, when we use contempt, something's wrong with you. When we are so defensive, no, I didn't say that, I'm not as bad as you claim me to be. And then we finally come to contempt, and then just shut each other out. That argument pattern is what becomes detrimental to our marriage.
People can actually learn how to use anger against you to control you. That's a scary thing. That's got to be assessed. I mean, in this quote, figuring out how to navigate and deal with constructively getting along on differences and more.
Absolutely. And what we have to understand about ourselves and about our spouse, that when we feel this space between what our spouse says, this bond that connects us, I call it our safe haven. When we feel that safe haven is threatened, or maybe you don't like me, or you're controlling me, or you think less of me, or you're not there for me, you're not taking care of me. When this is threatened and the alarms sound, danger, danger, you're not my safe haven, we have to realize that powerful emotions arise inside of us. This anger, this fear, this anxiety, the anxiety of, oh, you're going to leave me, the fear of what's going to happen, and the anger of how dare
13 miles.
Don't you talk to me like that, don't you do this. And these emotions rise up inside of us.
Down to Dry Ridge.
This primal response of, I'm going to fight you, or I'm going to flee from you, or I'm going to freeze and wait until the danger is over. And we have to be aware within ourselves. Do I go to anger first? Because anger is a M&M coating. It's protective coating for me to feel the sadness and vulnerability and this loss. Fear is also a way of me to try and cope with restoring this bond. And if we go to anger first, we need need to be aware of how it impacts our spouse. Yes, anger wants to stop the conversation, wants to give ourselves the upper hand. If I talk louder and harsher and faster, and I remind you of all the wrongs you've done, maybe you'll hear me and understand me. We have to be aware. Even our fear that pulls us away, causes us to withdraw and shut down, that's also very painful for our spouse. I can't find you when you pull back and shut down. And the anxiety and this worry doesn't allow us to be fully present. We have to be aware of that in ourselves and take responsibility for that and its impact.
Sharon, I'm thinking of a couple. Let's say she grew up in a home where her dad was a yeller, a screamer. Her mom was also maybe very strong, was like that to her. And anytime someone raises their voice or what have you, she almost cowers in fear. Her spouse learns that weakness in her. You hear what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That she has lost her voice. It's been taken from her.
Yes.
And then she winds up capitulating or being a peacemaker, doing everything she can to give in the moment. And that turns to anger inward. You know, that can manifest itself in depression, or it can be she just comes to a place where she's going to explode. And the real issue is he's mean, you hear what I'm saying? But she's getting, the projection is onto her that she's the problem. But there are challenges here. And you've got to see these patterns too as you begin to try to make your way toward each other.
Absolutely. And Tim, this is actually one of the first steps that I'm inviting couples to. We are doing a 7-week marriage challenge of saying, put all your energies into doing something that can shift your marriage, turn it around, that can begin a healing process. And one of those first challenges is recognize the argument cycle that you and your spouse get stuck in. Recognize, I get angry because maybe that's the only way I got to be heard in my family. Anger shut down my mom or my dad who were critical and harsh. So now I use anger. And then maybe the wife says, and then anger to me feels dangerous. And then when I feel anger, I then have to just go along with it and hide until I finally explode. Now I'm the explosive woman. It is being able to understand those patterns and to take responsibility for it. So first is understanding your argument cycle, and then to be influenceable. Tim, if you are influenceable in your marriage, you're going to turn your marriage around. If you can just say to your spouse, you know what, I use anger to stop the conversation, and you know, most of us, that's what we want from our spouse. I am challenging couples to take big, major steps to be able to turn your marriage around and start a healing process, regardless of whether or not your spouse chooses to. If both of you sit down and say, hey, let's really try to turn our marriage around so that we can be a safe haven for each other. Let's start with this. First, let's recognize the argument cycle that we get stuck in. Secondly, let's be influenceable. Let's take responsibility for the ways we react and how it impacts each other. And then a third one, Tim, is let's be kind. You know, when you don't know what to do in a moment, don't yell, don't get angry, don't shut down, be kind, use manners. It will soften the hardened of hearts. You know, when my husband, when I'm upset or mad and I'm getting on my soapbox to give him a mouthful, when he just softens and says, I'm sorry, lovey, you know, maybe I did that wrong. You know, I didn't maybe consider that. I'm sorry, lovey. His soft position, using manners and kindness, him recognizing his part, being influenceable, softens me. It just softens, because at the heart of what I'm really wanting, I'm really not wanting to get my view across and punish him and scold him, although sometimes I, you know, just 5 minutes of that, Lord. You know, what I'm really wanting is his soft heart to understand how I've been hurt and to want to come and listen to me. And that's the fourth one, is listening. If you don't listen to your spouse is not going to listen to you. And listen without
Boy,
defending.
there's a great...
Don't try.
I agree with that totally. You have to listen to each other. And I'm sometimes poor at that because I'm always thinking ahead. And I got to keep my mind open and listen.
Listen to be able to.
That's a good lesson right there.
Listening to you, two words come to mind. the significance of my spouse being a safe place. We've mentioned the word safety before. It's hard for me to enter into your world if I feel like you're dangerous to me. Or every time I do, all you do is hurt me. And so I need to know that you're safe. And so those skills that you're teaching are critical. And the other word that entered my mind was the word sorry. I think for a lot of men, and women, but men in particular think if I say I'm sorry, then it should be all gone. I said I'm sorry to you. What else do you want from me? No. If you're not safe, sorry doesn't mean much. Sharon, does it?
Right. And Tim, going back to the illustration of you and Julie, if your roses came with a Julie, I recognize that when and I don't know what the issue was, I'll make it up, Tim. I recognize that if I don't call you to let you know I'm going to be late, makes you feel not a priority to me. It makes you feel not important to me. And that hurt I see, and I get it. We don't just want, sorry I didn't call you that I was going to be late. Now, isn't that good enough? Why can't you accept that?
Right.
We are looking for our spouse to say, please understand the wound, what it means to me.
One of the rules I often establish with couples, if they're having really a tough time, say over extended family or something, listen, I don't want you talking about that outside here. It's so explosive, and you guys escalate, meaning you go from 0 to 100 at each other's throat so fast that you're not equipped yet emotionally and with skills to talk through this issue. So Sharon, that becomes an off the table subject that we'll deal with together. How do you handle when couples have some topics that are just like, okay, we can't even go there?
For a couple to be vulnerable enough, to be influenceable enough to recognize it, that I just can't talk about you criticizing my mom, or it's just too painful for me to talk about, what happened at, the last event.
Or money or anything.
Or money. It just, that's when couples need to reach out for help. This situation, this woundedness is too deep for us. We need that third party. And to get counseling, to get help. I know at Safe Haven Relationship Center, we work with couples through Zoom during this time, as well as in person, really to help understand the meaning, the deep woundedness, the hurt around these topics, and to find some resolve and problem solve around it. But until then, if you and your spouse can say, when it comes to money, it is such a hot topic, we just can't talk about it. I'd say then write down your views. What is your woundedness around it? What do you want your spouse to understand, and what do you want to see changed? Write it down on a 3x5 card, because if you're talking about it in the moment, oftentimes if your amygdala hijacks, that means the danger center in your brain gets triggered. You're not going to have just a calm, relaxed conversation when your brain is saying danger, danger. You can't have a calm, relaxed conversation when you're zooming down a roller coaster ride thinking that you're going to fall off. You just can't. So don't set yourself up for failure. Don't have meaningful conversations when your brain is hijacked and it's saying danger, danger, my world around me is dangerous. You have to have those conversations when you're calmer. Write it out if you can't talk about it. And if it's still too hot, reach out for help. You don't have to stay stuck.
Would you believe? Here we are, almost dry ridge.
Unstuck relatively easily with a bit of help.
Sharon, I want to go a little bit deeper here because we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that there are some couples out there in relationships that are really broken. If she could call in, she might say something like this: he doesn't want to change. He's not going to change. Sharon, Tim, you know what he says to me? It's just who I am. It's just the way it is. And you're going to have to live with it, or else. And she's there, and she's wrestling with God, and she's looking at the family, and she's trying to figure out what to do. Sharon, we need to speak to her, or to him in this moment. I received a phone call over the last week from a young man in a really tough spot in his marriage. And he just wept and said, Tim, every day it keeps going the wrong way.
And you know, it is hard when our spouse says, this is who I am, just live with it. You know, there's the door, you can leave. You're the only one that feels like there's an issue. You know, I'm fine. And it is a very, very painful place that puts you at a fork on the road. And, you know, the men that I have worked with that have come to the intensives saying, you know, my wife has forced me here, my pastor said I had to, usually that cold, guarded, self-protective coding is just that, it's self-protecting. There are a lot of men or a lot of women to be vulnerable, to say, wow, I have a part in this marriage to creating part of this difficulty. That vulnerability that I might be doing something wrong or doing something hurtful or not fostering a good marriage is too vulnerable. And so being hardened and defensive and I've got to blame you keeps them protected. And to crack that eggshell where that husband or that wife says, it's okay for me to be vulnerable. I can self-reflect and say, yeah, you know, my tone of voice is very demeaning to you, but I don't know how else to get my view across. You know, that's how I learned to talk growing up. Yeah. That vulnerability actually is character. Takes courage, takes maturity.
Yeah, and what are you guilty of? Loving someone, wanting to make a marriage or relationship work. Sharon, I've often said, listen, you can't change your spouse, but the one thing you can do is change you. If you go with a soft heart to Julie and say, hey, listen, honey, I know
Dry Ridge Toyota there.
And I don't know what it is inside of me that you don't understand loves you, but I do. And I'm going to go and try to figure out what are my blind spots. What do I need to understand? Where do I need to go? What can be done here? Because I don't want you to not know that I love us, I love our family. And the truth is, you need that kind of support. And when you step in that direction, what you learn to do is sculpt strength, right, Sharon? And you begin to move in a positive direction. And Sharon, I want to use the rest of the time here to focus in on what you're talking about, how to jumpstart marriages, because people want help and they want hope and they want it now. Everybody I talk to says, hey, rub it all over us, get everything we can going. Sharon, can you point us in that direction?
Yes, and Tim, I'll start right there with what you said. If you are listening, you make a decision that you on your own are wanting to grow and jumpstart a safe haven marriage. And when you make that decision, you know, go to your spouse and say, you know, we're not getting along. We are arguing, we're easily triggered, we're defensive, we blame each other, we talk over each other, and I don't want that anymore. I want to enjoy you because I want to get back to why I married you. You know, you're a good man, you're a good woman, and if you make that decision and go to your spouse, you're right, even though your spouse is cold, is defensive, is protected, you're opening a little hedge of softness to be able to say, I want to love you well. I am going to understand our argument cycle. I want to change my part. Come to your spouse and say, would you like to join me? You know, and your spouse might say, well, yeah, fine, you started because you're the one with the problem. Okay, you know, all right.
That's true.
But I want a better. And if your spouse says, you know, I don't know how this can work, but all right, let's do this together, all the better. And to be able to, the two of you,
well, we've got the essence of it here. Our time is out for this half hour coming down to Dry Ridge. I hope you've enjoyed the program on WIOK 107.5 FM on the radio dial.
Be more vulnerable.
God bless you and have a great day. Travels with the Stephensons, 859-750-0000. RJS 750-0000 at gmail.com. God bless you. 107.5 FM on the radio dial. Dr. Dobson.
It's also how to be loving. It's really hard.